podcast excellence since 2005. This is the King of Podcasts radio network, kingofpodcasts.com.
Entrepreneurship and becoming the next everyday millionaire. And it doesn't mean you have to hit the lottery. And the King of Podcasts Radio Network, yours truly, King of Podcasts, presents another wonderful edition of Podcasters Row. Thanks for listening to the program, finding it as you always do through all various channels, including now on my YouTube channel at King of Podcasts. You're going to find it there, and everything is available. If you want to go ahead and find out where to find the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, and other places, kingofpodcasts.com. Why am I going to make you go wander around for other places? One website, one place to go, one gateway to everything. Right there. So right now I want to go and speak to my next guest. He has a globally acclaimed podcast, which joins forces, which is actually supporting entrepreneurs in creating high-performing teams that drive employee engagement, satisfaction, and fulfillment with the help of the Everyday Millionaire Podcast. And with me right now is one of the hosts of that program. He is the CEO of the Real Estate Investment Network and a global top 100 podcaster in entrepreneurship, Patrick Francey. Patrick, thanks for being on.
Oh, thanks for having me join you as a guest. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
And just to give a heads up, wonderful to have you on with us. And not just the Everyday Millionaire Podcast, but also you have a podcast with your wife called the Mindset Matters Podcast. We'll go into that as well. But when it comes to, you said before we got on, it's been about 8 years now you've been hosting podcasts here. So again, it's around that trend where it was becoming very cachet to go and get into podcasting. People were starting to feel like there was some mainstream podcasts that were coming out. People were really getting themselves behind it. And, you know, in the days of streaming, knowing that Apple Podcasts and Spotify, all these podcast outlets were giving us such a gateway to be able to go and get content out there that radio wasn't really offering us to us anymore. Tell me about your inroads into podcasting in terms of these two podcasts and expanding upon what you already have been doing for, over 30 years in real estate in Canada, where you are. Talk to me about what made the transition.
Well, I gained a lot of expertise over the past many years of being in business and being a real estate investor and actually educating so many in how to invest in real estate. I was feeling some pressure from some peers that it was time for me to write a book. And at the time, I looked at that and I go, I don't really feel like I have a book in me. And we went on vacation. And as I was sitting on the beach, meditating on life and what I wanted to do and how would I do something different than a book, the thought process came into me about a podcast. Now, 8 years ago, podcasts weren't that popular. I had no idea really what was involved in doing a podcast.
Right.
But ultimately, I was sitting on the beach thinking about, one of the things with the Real Estate Investment Network and what we're really teaching people to do is how to create a financial future investing in real estate. And the goal for many was, as simple as it seems these days to be a millionaire, that $1 million kind of pales in comparison to the billions and the trillions and all of the things that are being thrown out there today. But ultimately, for most everyday kind of common people, having a net worth of $1 million is built careers, built businesses, but did it very quietly. And there was no fanfare. They weren't being interviewed. They weren't in the paper. They weren't in the media. They were just people going to work and building a strong net worth. And that's where I came up with the term. I said to myself, gosh, they're just everyday millionaires. And because I knew so many of them, I also knew that they had interesting stories. And I went, wouldn't that be great to share with people that having and gaining a net worth of $1 million was achievable? You didn't have to be outstanding in anything. You just really went to work. And so I started to examine and have that conversation on the podcast and really the journey of people and how did you achieve the results you achieved. And it was really just left with a couple of different taglines I used, one of which was seemingly ordinary individuals achieving extraordinary results. And then ultimately, my goal with the podcast is for people to hear it and say, gosh, if that guy can do it or that girl can do it, I can do it too. And that was the real premise that I built off many years. And then my wife is both an Olympic and world-class mental performance coach for athletes and business owners, has been doing that many years, award-winning. And we said, so much of it is built on mindset. So we launched the podcast, Mindset Matters. So that's kind of the Coles Notes of how I got into the game of podcasting and how I took it on. It wasn't very strategic. It was like so many things I do. It was a bit of my entrepreneurial accident, if you will. Mm-hmm. And here we are today.
In some areas, I look at what I've read for myself. I read The Millionaire Next Door. That was always a book that was recommended to me. And another book I went and looked for was The Simple Path to Wealth, J.L. Collins. Thinking, there are people that just can realize, through a long-term career, if you're able to go and put aside 30 to 40%, 50% of your earnings and put that aside and let it accrue in any kind of, ETFs or any kind of Roth IRAs, anything like that, you can actually go ahead and accrue and accumulate $1 million eventually within 20, 30 years. It can be done that way, but for those that are in here, it's also a different environment where in business, that's what you hope for, building a business that will help you to go ahead and become a millionaire, or just in different areas. Specifically, what is it you talk about to folks when it comes to focusing on individual wealth or finding it through various avenues of entrepreneurship to gain that wealth?
Well, there's a couple different aspects to it. And, part of why we evolved to include the Mindset Matters component of it was after interviewing so many guests and hearing so many great stories, I unpack, the journey, but also, what was it? I often ask the question, is your journey as an entrepreneur, as a leader in your career, is it nature or is it nurture? How did you come by it? So in other words, I'm opening up the conversation about how did you get on this journey? Was it because your parents were entrepreneurs? What is your story that got you on this path? Or what was the fork in the road moment? And then ultimately you start to hear the different versions of what it takes to, and the courage it takes to take on initiatives, to follow a path, to live into your vision, to embrace the values that light you up, and to continue to move forward methodically. Very few are get rich overnight. As a matter of fact, I can't even think of any that come off the top of my head. It was really, literally, one step at a time, grinding it out and building a future net worth. And there was different components of that. Some were real estate investors, some were business owners, some were just really career savvy individuals who were willing to take their capital and put it to work. So there's a range of ways to achieve that outcome, but ultimately it boils down to the focus to do it. The ultimate goal of most get to it is that it's not about the money as much as it is about creating a life and a lifestyle that the money can bring them. But ultimately, it comes back to the values, living a values-driven life. And so I don't know if that answers your question, but that was kind of the premise of how I approached it. And the questions I ask are more about how did your journey unfold? How and what role did your parents play in that? What was that fork in the road moment? What was some of the failures that drove you to step up even more? And, it's interesting how many really cool stories come out of that, yet the guests don't really look at it as a cool story. It's just what happened. It's what I had to do. It's the way things unfolded, so it is very interesting when you start to unpack that.
Now, the Mindset Matters podcast, I'm going to focus on that because there's something interesting that in my full-time work, one of the other networks I operate is cannabisradio.com. And in that area, we are doing areas where we're expanding into alternative treatments, plant medicine, and various holistic areas of treatment. And there's a show that I had just started, and literally I just recorded yesterday the first 2 episodes with our host. And the show's going to be called Igniting the Spirit Within. And in her area, she, is, success coach, does a lot of mentoring, a lot of talks. And she explains, just yesterday we were talking about the fact of the role of the conscious and subconscious mind in the process, and your conscious mind acting as a gatekeeper, subconscious being capable of change, and to tap into that subconscious mind, that there are various paradigms that are put into us growing up that, if by tapping into the subconscious, it's higher mental faculties helping to increase our perception, memory, will, intuition, imagination, and reason, shaping behavior, shaping decisions. In Mindset Matters, it's the kind of idea of almost like biohacking, that's becoming very trendy and popular and getting a lot of more talk in the space. Is that something towards kind of the mindset that you and your wife Stephanie Hanlon Francey also talk about? Is that kind of the area you're approaching?
Yeah, it's quite an expansive topic when you really think about it. But ultimately, for 30 years, Stephanie particularly, and me alongside her, has been working with professional and amateur athletes and small business owners, and realizing that, in her area of expertise, she was the first NHL skating coach, in the National Hockey League. So she was a female in a male world. She was the first paid female to actually coach NHL level players to improve their skating. But what's interesting about that is what she learned very quickly is that when you're at that level already, really, what can you do technically to improve? Yes, there's some things that you could improve, but what she opened up the door to our journey was the reality that in working with these professional athletes that are being paid millions of dollars to perform, the realization came to her is that their technical aspects of what they were doing was important, but what she opened the door to was conversation, giving a space and a safe space for these young men to have conversations about what was going on in their life. And that could be, everything from financial to contracts to significant others to family matters. And as she worked through that with them, she started to realize that when she gave them space to clear their mind, to help them bust through some of the challenges that they were facing, ultimately their performance on the ice improved. And that really took us on a journey of understanding us as people, because we can easily cross-reference the similarities between the mindset of a professional athlete and a high-performing athlete and that of a business owner or an entrepreneur or that A-type personality, career-driven individual who wants to have high performance. But ultimately, when we get into it, we start to realize that, yes, we can tap into subconscious. The first step in all of that is even having the awareness of how we're thinking and how the world is unfolding. Is there a universal law? And you start to investigate it. And you understand that, at some level, there's always this space that we get in our own way. And we need to consider, how do we take ownership of it so that we can get out of our own way? And that's understanding the values that drive us. Are we living a values-driven life in integrity with who we really are? And are we prepared to go on a journey of self-discovery? One of the lessons I learned early on as a young man, and it was from Stephanie, by the way, when we first started dating and hanging out over 30 years ago, I used to, I'd be a little bit rough around the edges. I'll be gentle on myself. And she would often say to me, she'd go, "Sweetheart, why are you that way? Like, why do you react that way?" And I responded to her often, "It's just the way I am. It's just how I do it."
Right.
And one day she looked at me and when I said that, it was in a heated moment. I was in somebody's face. We walked away. She was pissed off. She looks at me and she goes, "Why the hell do you react that way? Why do you do that?" And I go, "It's just the way I am." And she looked at me and she goes, "It's a choice, right?" What? What are you talking about?
Right.
And that actually was, the fork in the road moment for me when I realized that as much as I wanted to achieve a result and have an outcome, it was really about who I was being in the context of my life. And from that point on, I was always looking to say, how can I be a better version of myself? How can I evolve to be the man I want to be, the husband, the brother, the child, parents, So it was really, my journey has been for many years on understanding that fundamental, it's not the goal, it's who you need to become to achieve the goal. And I get that's a bit cliche.
No,
but it is very true.
Right, that makes sense. But the thing is also it's your own personal your own personal control over what happens, over the destiny that you have. Any existential obstacles you're going to overcome because it's going to be on you. You're going to put the onus on yourself. You're going to go ahead and perform and execute, because no matter, there's no excuses. You're going to you're going to push through. You're going to thrive, and you're going to make your way through.
That's true. And when I realized, a few years ago, several years ago now, my own purpose, I live by one fundamental. My tagline is, be your greatest self, live your best life. And that really is my purpose. And it's not just my purpose to live that way and be that way and operate that way. It is really to share that message and support those individuals who literally do want to be their greatest self and live their best life by design. It's intentional. It's a choice. It's not making excuses, to your point. It is being the best version of yourself, knowing that there's always a new version or a better version of yourself. And like we often say, take your ceiling of limitation and make it your new floor. And so there's different ways and methodologies, and depending on where you are in life and the challenges you face and what your goals are, what you have for a vision of your life, it takes on different ways to achieve that.
So I want to talk about the area of entrepreneurship and the routes of getting there in comparison to Canada versus U.S. Because in Canada, I know that taxes significantly are a bit higher for those in the United States, but obviously there's reasons for that in terms of healthcare system and also a lot of benefits that are provided by the federal government in Canada. But the one thing is that when I look at where things are, okay, for taxes in states like where I'm at in the state of Florida, 22%. For standard tax rate here, and for an income of $75,000 in British Columbia, 28%. And when I look at where they have in various incomes, if you're just trying to now to go ahead and get to the next income bracket to get to the $1 million, you're talking about it's almost the 39.5% on incomes of $75,000, 53.3% for incomes of $150,000, and that's quite a bit of a setback because of the fact of how much you have to go and give back to make that amount. So when you're looking at, okay, if I want to make $1 million, I got to be able to make $2 million to make that million that I want, versus if I'm in the United States, it's a quarter of that. And that's one of those things. Is it specifically where your podcast will talk to more Canadian listeners that are looking for that, but also realize those tax brackets are a bit of a burden and that's going to be a bigger hurdle to climb?
I think there's a couple things around it. So first, just for clarification,
Sure.
The Everyday Millionaire was about creating a net worth of $1 million, a true net worth of $1 million, not including your primary residence. So that was about creating a net worth. In terms of income, and when we come to taxes, these are all strategies within business. So when I'm coaching business owners and working with them, of course, in Canada, our tax brackets are very high. And listen, Canada is a very highly taxed country.
Yes.
And it's not just income tax, by the way. It is taxes that you're paying on GST and sales tax and all of the kind of hidden taxes within our fuel and our gas, all the things that are going on. So infuriating if you're an entrepreneur, if you're a capitalist like me, a little bit of a libertarian like I am, you start to really go, okay, this is enough. But having said all of that, when you take responsibility and you work and build your team the right way, you ultimately can work around the tax issues that you have. But it takes a very focused effort. And understanding that, U.S. and Canada, and listen, governments around the world, they all operate in deficits, they all operate in debt, and none of them are great. So ultimately, when we look at government, if they ran it like a business, they'd all be broke. So we can all have our complaints about taxes. And, in the case of the U.S., you're a much bigger country. You're 10x what Canada is. We're 41 million for the whole country. You're almost 10x, or you are 10x that. So when we look at tax revenues and what this country has to generate, and getting out of the politics and the mindless spending and the irresponsibility around it, my point is that ultimately as entrepreneurs, we walk the line and use the tax codes, if you will, to the best of our advantage to pay the least amount of tax. And that's really all I can say about it. And then when I'm working with entrepreneurs in my coaching programs, that's the kind of discussions that we have.
One of the areas I looked at right now, it was most recently, I was looking at the NHL. There was a story that popped up in my TikTok feed. I remember I was looking at the fact that they were talking about the issues about the taxes that are being accrued by those basically on their contracts. And I remember, I forget which NHL player to have, where I saw they had like a $70 million signing bonus. And the thing is, now the signing bonus is going to be kind of structured differently because of that he is being taxed based on the games being played in the United States or in Canada. And there's a part where that, along with issues with other taxes that he has to go and take care of, that is one of the areas I looked at was like, wow. So if a team, like say they're a U.S. team and then that player is going to be traded to a Canadian team, all these different factors come into play. It's like even the millionaires there. In athletics, it's like, okay, in sports, you're dealing with all issues here. And for those who want to diversify their portfolio and work with other areas outside of Canada, is that something that's a bit of a focus, or do you look at more like just on a worldwide view?
Well, I think that, when you look at what's happening again in Canada, I can, have some, it's not one of my focuses, but because of my background within the NHL and professional sport, you start to realize that some of these individuals are paying 50% taxes at some level, whether it be on their paychecks or the bonuses that they get. I mean, it really is crazy. And the sad part of it is that they don't have a lot of outlets in terms of expensing things and being able to write some things down and not having to take that as income, which I say in Canada is very highly taxed at that level of income. So is there a workaround? Some have a workaround. When you come from the US into Canada, American players are a little bit better off because they can still keep that residence in US, even though they're playing in Canada. They have work visas and they have certain things so that their tax consequences are slightly different. But, at the end of the day, either government, whether it be the US or Canada, and I've certainly made money in the US, and the US IRS is standing there with their hand out going, oh, you want that money? Yeah, okay, well, let's just take a little off the top before we give it to you. So there's always within those countries and within professional sport or any even business, they're always going to take their cut. That's for sure.
Trust me. I can only think of the time last year where I had to go and drop off 15% of my total income in a check, the cashier's check, to go and drop it off at the IRS office nearby. That's wonderful.
100%.
Oh, that felt so refreshing. But either which way, I want to ask also about when it comes to when you started the podcast, again, 2016, and now we've had the pandemic period that we dealt with, which obviously made a big, let's just say, a tectonic change in terms of people that go to work for business. They're working from an office versus working at home. I know for me, that ultimately changed because I've been working from home ever since. And the other thing, too, is just the opportunities that are available now in terms of if it's done more remote or if it's something where you might change what kind of business opportunities that have been out there. How have you basically navigated the changes of being post-pandemic, even for Canada itself, also going through a longer period of business-wise of trying to come back from and recover from the pandemic? U.S. also having the issues of various states, but it's overall, it was just a whole change. And I was running on your podcast, how have you navigated that throughout?
Well, I think there's, it was an interesting time when everything was shut down and nobody could go anywhere. And of course, to have that interactivity, being online and doing webinars, that was all part of it. I came out of a model within the Real Estate Investment Network where we are doing as many as 60 events, live events a year to crowds of anywhere from 100 to 1,000 in the space of education. Now, when that all shut down, it was a big hit to the business overall, but we pivoted quite quickly because we were already using Zoom. I have an international team, so we were meeting on a regular basis. We understood the platform of Zoom. So we pivoted very, very quickly with our audience and with our community to drive live events. So that part of it was great. And of course, the podcast, we've always worked from home, and I continue to this day to work from home. We've had offices in the past, but certainly since the lockdowns, myself, my wife, our international team, we all work from home. Now, what I am bumping up against, and I'm sure that many are feeling or seeing it, is that people are struggling with, I refer to it as Zoom gloom. Part of their jobs, if they're already working from home, they're sitting in front of a camera all day, they're on webinars all day, they're interacting with others on camera all day. And I think that the challenge that many are facing is how do you draw and keep the attention of an audience on Zoom and this or any kind of platform, actually, some virtual platforms. I think people are a little bit tired of it. And that's a transition that I'm feeling that everybody is going through, and having and grasping and getting attention, having people pay attention and buy into what you're doing is becoming more challenging as the need for it becomes less, because now people can have live interactions with others. So it's just an interesting time. I think that, societal and business wise, we're still feeling our way through what is the best approach. How do you get somebody's attention? I mean, I'm sure you've experienced that if you've done any live webinars, you can have a few hundred people or a few thousand people register,
Yeah.
and then the next thing you know, only 25% of them show up. So these are just the challenges in these economic times and given what's going on in the world. And it's going to take a while to sort through it and kind of crack the code from a business perspective.
Well, I remember they were trying to do a lot of virtual trade shows coming out of that, and I mean, that just didn't work. I mean, even in my outfit, we were trying to go that route, but it's like, I mean, they might have some things that might look good, but virtual booths and going to virtual sessions, no. And I'm glad that the trade show business got back to where it is. I mean, it's not completely gone back to where it is, but I think people just got a lot smarter and just got a little more efficient on how they do it. It's just not a lot of gross overspending like it was before. Now,
I think there's a few things around that I just want to touch on that. For those that are in that live event, like trade show kind of world, I mean, there's no denying that what many are bumping up against is the increased costs of venues, the increased costs of serving coffee at those events, just the actual operating costs. And how do you justify, or can you actually, put that kind of money on the table and then risk not getting an ROI on that? And as I talk to many people in the industry, when you look at travel costs, if you're flying a team in and you got hotels and flights and food, and then of course the venue cost itself. So it becomes a bigger challenge and a higher risk. And that's why I'm seeing that as much as we're seeing live events come back, they're much smaller, and I'm talking about Canada now, but they're much smaller and they're far less extravagant in terms of what they deliver for an experience.
No, totally agree with that. I remember so many different events that were just the large scale types. But yeah, it's also, then people don't realize just how much it is to go ahead and kind of put those events together. It's just, it's very difficult now. Now, in your real estate background, I would imagine that, with the Everyday Millionaire podcast, that one of the areas that I always hear from other entrepreneurs or just people that are just, here's, the one idea is always about investment in real estate. And I'm down here where I'm at in South Florida. So a lot of that being done down here. There's a whole lot of new buildings, condos, homes that are just here that are being just bought up. And, when it comes to people in other markets, they don't want to go and put their money in banks. They don't want to put it in holding in other financial institutions. No, they're going to just put into real estate, into equity, just put into property. So one of the areas that I'll imagine in your own background, in Canada, working for decades in real estate, and also, as you mentioned, the Canada's Real Estate Investment Trust. One of the areas right now we're looking at is it's tough for housing, because in the current housing market, looking at the Canadian Real Estate Association, homes sold in August fell compared to a year ago. There's a holding pattern in terms of the buying market. The amount of borrowing costs are going down as well. And there's a lot of that change. And, there's supposed to be some more interest rates they're supposed to be better off coming up in the next year. Prospective buyers are saying might continue to hold off until improve the affordability. So if you want to invest in real estate, you're not going to get the best bang for your buck. So is that an area that you focus on when it comes to what people could do to accrue wealth by what money they're able to go ahead and earn and what they can go and put aside to grow? Is real estate still an option that you go to and you recommend a lot?
Well, it's interesting is that we've been teaching investing in real estate for 30 plus years. So ultimately, there's a couple things that everybody needs to consider, is that even in your own narrative today, right now, is that you talked about where real estate was a year ago and what was happening a year ago. You're looking at historical things, and that's fine, by the way. That's not to say that that's wrong. But when we look at investing in real estate, we have to ask ourselves, what is the future of real estate in any given region? So first off, real estate's regional. Secondly, as investors, we want to look into the future. We don't really care about the past so much, or even what's happening today. These are all things that we kind of work into our view of the world, but then we have to look into the future and say, well, where is real estate going? Now, there are some real economic drivers, US and Canada. There is a system, there is a process, understanding the real estate cycle. These are all terms that people have used and they use a lot, but let me break it down a little bit further. So when we look at real estate, we say, well, what really drives real estate? Well, the first thing that drives real estate is knowing that there's going to be jobs in a given area. Secondly, if there's jobs in the area, what do we experience? Well, we have population growth, because people are moving into that area because there's work there. And if we have jobs and we have population growth, what does that mean? Well, it means that we've got GDP growth. So if we look at the very root of an economic driver. If gross domestic product is positive, which means there's jobs, which means there's people moving in to see those jobs, that means there's demand for rentals, because people moving into a region, the first 18 months to 2 years, what do? They rent. So what happens is that when those people are moving in, if we're what I refer to as a rental housing provider, a little nicer term than landlord. But when we look and we say, well, we're in the business of investing in real estate and providing rental units for a particular client, we then look into the future and go, well, we see that gross domestic product in Florida, specifically where in Florida? We break it right down to region. Mm-hmm. Why are people moving into that city? What makes Miami hot? Why are people coming in there? Because as long as there's demand, and that means that you're going to have that lineup for your business of being a rental housing provider. People are coming in, they want your product. You look at supply, you look at demand, you look at the economic health, and then you start to make investment strategies. So that's kind of really Cole's notes. Yes, there's influencers in there like interest rates, but interest rates come and go. They're on and they're off. It depends on what's happening, right? There's political influencers. Somebody moves into a municipality, goes, we're putting in these changes. We're upping property taxes, or we're building infrastructure. What are we doing? So when we look at that, we say, well, what's the economic health of a city? Mm-hmm. So we're breaking it down into different aspects. And I mean, I could certainly go on all day about it, but the point is that there is a system, there is a process. And then ultimately the mistake that most people make is they use the wrong strategy given the economic conditions. That's one issue that they make. Why are you doing a fix and flip in an economy that's slowing down, as an example? So we have to consider the strategy given the economy. That's the first part. And the other oversight that many people have is they're not clear on why they're investing in real estate. Are you investing in real estate for income today? Or are you investing in real estate because, in the future, maybe in retirement, you're going to want to supplement your pension, for example. So being clear on what it is you want out of real estate is so important. And it's one of the, I would say, more common mistakes that people make. They get into it because I want to, I'm going to make $1,000 a month cash flow and I'm going to put it in my jeans. Well, no, you're not. Not a chance in hell. You're actually going to take that $1,000 a month and keep feeding it into that property to maintain it, to build a reserve fund, to do all the things that it takes to run a business called I own this piece of real estate. So a long answer to a short question, but I covered as much as I could.
Oh, no, you did great. But there also is a part where, with some entrepreneurs or some potential entrepreneurs that want to fall into programming like this, that feel like the get rich quick kind of thing. Obviously, MLMs, the obviously thought of going into the stock market and just hitting the stocks and trying to hit like to the moon kind of things. That mindset that comes in for those that feel like they want to go high risk. They want to get high risk, high reward. They feel like, why am I going to go this long, treacherous route of going through investments and, eventually accruing the wealth after I've well done and retired. And that's the part where people want to feel that, the satisfaction now. And obviously, there's those that in the same mindset as well, that you should have the mindset to get to that goal quicker. So what do you say to those that are going to look for the get rich quick idea and feel like, okay, I can go a different entrepreneurial route and get there faster? Obviously, that feels like the faster and the easiest way to get there. But I mean, for those that you want to kind of bring them back down to earth and get them on the ground, what do you tell those people if you were able to persuade them to look at your way?
Well, in working literally with thousands of real estate investors now over this many years, working one-on-one, one-on-many, and with many entrepreneurs, as well as literally interviewing everyday millionaires, I don't think I have a single story of a get-rich tactic that has worked. Now,
right.
That could be, but ultimately what it comes down to is when you talk about high risk, risk reward, all the rest of it, that also breaks down to how old are you? If you're 30 years old and you want to throw a bunch of money up against the wall, see what sticks, okay, well, you got time to recover. A little different conversation. If you're 60, you may want to consider, throwing money up against the wall to see what sticks, because you don't have the same length of time to recover just based on even age. And is it what you want to do? So I think there's a couple of fundamentals. The luckiest individuals I've ever met have just put one foot in front of the other and just kept on working. Now, along the way, there's been some great opportunities. I have been in business 40 plus years, and I can tell you that I've grounded out. I've created a net worth that is really great for my wife and I, and we're very proud of what we've achieved in that side of it. We're more proud, by the way, of what we achieved just in lifestyle in our life. That was really our vision. Now, having said all that, I've had a couple of kind of home runs along the way. I joke and I tell the story about my $1 million accident. And although it's too long a story to share here, is that when you have $1 million accident, it's in the time frame of over 40 years. And it happened, 10, 15 years after I got into the business of investing in real estate and after I grew my business. So those accidents happen. Does that get rich quick? I would say no, but it was a nice addition to my existing portfolio and my existing net worth.
Fantastic. All right, so we're going to go and wrap everything up here and send people to the everydaymillionaire.ca, where you can find both the Everyday Millionaire podcast and the Mindset Matters podcast. Both there, go and take a look at for all future episodes. 200 plus episodes of Everyday Millionaire, 150 plus of the Mindset Matters podcast. And take a minute real quick, Patrick, to just let people know about how they can get involved with what you're doing in terms of the show, and what are the things that you have that are upcoming that people want to go ahead and make sure they get involved with.
Well, the best thing to do is follow me on Twitter, P. Francey, follow me on LinkedIn, Patrick Francey, and even the Everyday Millionaire on Instagram. There's always something going on there. I'm in a phase of my life. I'm 66 years old. So I'm in a phase of my life where I'm into a transition of what's next for us. So we are running a shift coaching program that we do live, small group coaching, like literally 20 people, very select, those who want to go on a journey of self-discovery and being and growing into the best version of themselves. And that's the work that Stephanie and I do. And like I say, she's an Olympic and world-class mental performance coach working with high-level business owners and athletes. And so we collectively come together. We have a great program. And that's really our biggest initiative right now. And it's what we want to take on as we go into, again, this next phase of our life.
Wonderful. I really appreciate you taking time out. And I'm glad that we got a chance to go and connect together. Patrick Francey, Everyday Millionaire Podcast, and the Mindset Matters podcast. I really appreciate you taking time out and letting us know what you're doing. And, it's wonderful. I mean, it's great sound advice. And, I want to be one of those Everyday Millionaires as well. And I'm sure all of us do. So any way we can get to that point, I'm glad that your show and your platform's out there for people to get that chance to find their way, get the mindset that they need, and find the wherewithal to get there, to get to that point so they can also find that wealth and success. Thank you again, Patrick.
Thank you. That was fun.
And thank you, listeners, for listening to another Podcasters Row. Appreciate all of you listening in. We'll talk to you next time.